Welcome to From Dorms to Desks, job hunting tips for those early in their careers. A podcast brought to you by College Recruiter job search site, which believes that every student and recent grad deserves a great career, and hosted by Work Defined. Join our AI co-hosts as they dive into tips, tricks, and insights that will help you land your next part-time, seasonal, internship, or entry-level job. Let's get your career started.
You know, I want you to picture the exact moment that the adrenaline finally just leaves your system.
Oh, yeah, that massive crash.
Exactly. You've just survived the final round of interviews. The agonizing multi-week prep is finally over. The endless series of handshakes, the exhausting gauntlet of Zoom calls where you're, hypersensitive to every micro-expression on the screen. All of that is done.
Right.
You've answered the behavioral questions. You've navigated those trick questions about your biggest weaknesses without sounding like a total cliche.
Which is incredibly hard to do, by the way.
It is. And you have maintained this baseline of professional enthusiasm until your cheeks physically ache from smiling.
Yeah, the interview fatigue is a very real thing.
Absolutely. And then you get that signal, that subtle verbal nod from the hiring manager or the recruiter that strongly implies, hey, you are our top choice.
The golden moment.
Right. So you close your laptop or you walk out of the lobby and you let out this massive breath thinking, well, I did it. The performance is over. I've crossed the finish line.
But you haven't.
No. In reality, the hiring landscape is far more treacherous right at that exact moment. You haven't crossed the finish line at all. You have just entered the absolute most delicate, highly scrutinized part of the entire race.
Yeah, the psychological shift that happens in that specific window is, well, it's fascinating. Primarily because the perception of pressure completely inverts.
What do you mean by inverts?
So for the candidate, the perceived pressure plummets to near zero. They think the hard work is done. But on the employer side of the table, the internal pressure is actually spiking to its absolute highest point in the entire process.
Wow. And that disconnect right there between the candidate's relief and the employer's spiking anxiety is exactly where the wheels come off for so many professionals.
It really is.
So we are pulling today from a really insightful June 2026 guide published by College Recruiter. They curated advice from several top directors of placement and CEOs across the industry.
It's a great piece of research.
It is. And while the guide frames this around the 5 mistakes made by students and recent grads before accepting an offer, the underlying psychological mechanisms we're going to unpack apply to absolutely everyone.
Yeah, 100%.
Whether you are negotiating your very first entry-level salary or you are a seasoned VP making a massive career pivot, the corporate machinery reacts to this post-interview window in the exact same way.
Because human nature doesn't change just because your title gets bigger.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to decode how hiring managers and internal recruiters are secretly evaluating you in the days between that final handshake and the moment ink hits the contract.
Because they are watching very closely.
They are. They want to see who you become when you think the test is over.
Yeah, and the concept of the performance ending is really the crux of the matter here. During a formal interview, everyone understands the implicit rules of engagement.
Right.
It's a highly structured, inherently artificial environment. The hiring committee knows you're putting on your absolute best, most polished face.
And they are doing the exact same thing representing the company culture.
Exactly. But the moment a verbal offer is floated, or they indicate you're the finalist, that rigid structure dissolves. The curtain falls.
So they stop looking at the resume.
They do. And suddenly, they are looking for their first authentic glimpse of what you are actually going to be like to work with on a random Tuesday afternoon when, project deadlines are looming and the stress is real.
Okay, let's unpack this, because there's a specific analogy that captures the danger of this phase perfectly. Treating the post-interview window like a victory lap is exactly like spiking the football on the 5-yard line.
Ooh, I like that.
Right. The game isn't over. You are celebrating in the end zone, you're doing a little dance, but you haven't actually scored the points yet.
And worse, the defense is still actively running at you and you aren't even looking at them.
That framing hits the nail on the head. So what the experts in this source material emphasize is that this post-interview phase is a real high-stakes business deal. It is a fundamental test of professional maturity.
Because up until the offer, the company holds the majority of the leverage. They're the gatekeepers.
Right.
But the second they communicate, hey, we want you, the power dynamic shifts toward the candidate. The company has tipped its hand.
And unfortunately, candidates frequently stumble precisely because they just don't know how to wield that newfound leverage.
They mishandle it completely. Sometimes it's due to underlying anxiety about the transition, but very often it's driven by a highly misdirected sense of excitement and relief that actually manifests as arrogance.
And that arrogant manifestation is what Alexander Dodge, he's the director of placement solutions at Bristol Associates. He points to this as the first major trap.
The illusion of the finish line.
Exactly. It causes candidates to completely drop their professional facade. Dodge points out that candidates who were absolutely stellar on Friday can suddenly appear rude, entitled, or just completely uncommitted to the process by Monday morning simply because they feel they've already won.
Yeah, and understand why a candidate dropping their facade is so catastrophic. We really have to look at the internal vulnerability of the hiring manager.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, when a manager decides to extend an offer, they are effectively spending their own internal political capital. They have to go to their director or to the HR department and advocate for you.
Oh, so they are putting their neck on the line.
Exactly. They are saying, look, I have evaluated the field, and this is the person we need to invest our budget in. I vouch for them. And that creates a massive vulnerability for the person hiring you. They are instantly terrified of buyer's remorse.
It's the ultimate professional vulnerability, because if they advocate for you and you turn out to be a total nightmare to manage, it doesn't just hurt the company's bottom line. It directly damages that hiring manager's reputation and credibility within their own organization.
Precisely. Because of this intense fear of making a bad hire, hiring managers become hyper-alert to behavioral anomalies in this specific window. Their radar for negative signals is just dialed up to a 10.
They're looking for an out.
Or at least they're paranoid about missing a red flag. So if a candidate suddenly changes their communication style, like if their emails shift from thoughtful and structured to blunt, one line demands the manager doesn't just write it off as a minor faux pas.
What do they see it as?
They see a terrifying preview of a toxic employee. They think, okay, the interview performance is over, and this is the real person I'm about to be stuck with for the next 3 years.
Now, I do want to push back on one specific characterization in Dodge's insights, though, because I know a lot of seasoned professionals listening to this will definitely bristle at it.
No, I think I know which part you mean.
Yeah, Dodge warns against appearing greedy during the negotiation phase. But wait a minute. We operate in a corporate culture that constantly tells candidates to aggressively advocate for themselves.
Right. Know your worth.
Exactly. We are told to know our worth, to push for equity, to negotiate every single offer on the table. So how does a hiring manager who presumably negotiated their own salary at some point distinguish between a candidate engaging in healthy, expected self-advocacy and a candidate who is exhibiting what Dodge calls greed?
It's a critical distinction, and you're right that the line can seem a bit blurry from the outside, but if we analyze the mechanics of the interactions Dodge is warning against, the distinction is rarely about the actual numbers on the table.
Really? So it's not the dollar amount?
No, it is almost entirely about the operational how. It is the tone of the execution. Healthy negotiation maintains the collaborative momentum of the interview process. Greed, or entitlement, presents as a sudden adversarial tonal shift.
Okay, let's ground that in reality. What does that tonal shift actually sound like in an email thread or on a follow-up call?
So, a mature, healthy negotiation is rooted in shared value. It sounds like, well, something like, I am incredibly energized by the prospect of joining this team. Based on my understanding of the aggressive targets we discussed for the upcoming Q3 product launch and my track record in scaling similar projects, I'd like to explore bringing the base salary closer to X to align with the market value of that impact.
Oh, I see. That approach is super collaborative. It ties the candidate's financial request directly to the company's goals.
Exactly. It maintains the professional grace of the interview.
You're still wearing the suit, metaphorically speaking. You are acting like a colleague trying to solve a mutual problem.
Right. Now, the greedy version, conversely, sounds like a hostage negotiation.
Oh, boy.
The enthusiasm for the work completely vanishes. It sounds like, I have another final round interview on Thursday, and I know my market rate is higher than this initial offer. I need you to match Y, or I'll have to pass.
Ouch. Yeah, that's abrasive.
Or, even worse, it manifests as this endless nickel and diming over trivial perks after the major financial numbers have already been agreed upon, purely because the candidate wants to feel like they won the negotiation.
Right.
That adversarial posture signals to the hiring manager that you view the relationship as a zero-sum game.
And the solution Dodge offers is so straightforward but clearly overlooked by a lot of people. Just recognize that the interview phase hasn't actually ended.
Exactly.
You have to maintain that professional grace. You still send a concise, well-crafted thank you note after the verbal offer. You maintain thoughtful, polite follow-up. You treat the negotiation as a collaborative business discussion rather than a rigid ultimatum.
And maintaining that thoughtful communication is paramount, because the alternative, which brings us to the insights of Stephen Liu, the CEO of Pin.com, is perhaps the most self-destructive maneuver a candidate can pull.
The ghosting.
Yes. Candidates frequently fail the post-interview communication test, not by saying the wrong thing, but by intentionally saying absolutely nothing at all.
The silence penalty. This is a fascinating behavioral quirk. We've all heard the stories of candidates going dark. The recruiter reaches out with a verbal offer or a follow-up question regarding logistics, and the candidate just leaves the email on read for 3, 4, sometimes 5 days.
Which is wild.
It is, because to a candidate, a few days might just feel like a long weekend. But in a corporate hiring cycle, a 72-hour silence is completely deafening.
It creates a massive logistical crisis on the employer's side. And what Liu points out is the deeply flawed psychology driving this behavior. Candidates often interpret their own silence as a strategic, highly sophisticated neutral move.
Oh, right. Playing hard to get.
Exactly. They believe they are leveraging the silence to project high value. Or they are simply trying to pause the clock while they furiously shop the offer around to other companies, hoping to spark a bidding war. The internal logic is, well, if I don't reply, I'm not formally declining, so the offer is just frozen in time.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because that completely ignores how corporate momentum works. You can't just pause the clock on a hiring manager's deliverable.
No, you definitely can't.
The clock is ticking loudly, and the team is still short-staffed. What I find so compelling here is the contrast between the candidate's perception of their silence and the reality of how it's received. They think they look like a highly sought-after prize.
But they don't.
Right. Let's walk through the actual unseen consequences of that silence on the employer's side. What is happening internally while the candidate is sitting at home, smugly waiting to reply?
We have to look at the internal champion, which is usually the internal recruiter or the hiring manager who fought for you. Throughout the interview process, this person has been your biggest advocate. They are the ones in the internal debrief meetings arguing your case, expending their own capital to say, look, this is our person. They're highly engaged. They possess the right technical skills. They are a perfect culture fit.
Yeah, they've gone to bat for you.
But when you go dark, you leave that internal champion completely exposed.
Right, because their boss is inevitably going to ask for a status update.
Exactly. The VP of marketing, or the department head, asks the recruiter on Tuesday morning, hey, where are we with getting the offer letter signed? And the recruiter has to admit, I haven't heard back from them since Friday.
Oh, that makes them look so bad.
It makes the recruiter look foolish. It makes them look like they misread your level of interest or your professionalism entirely. And because self-preservation is a powerful instinct in corporate environments, the recruiter will immediately start to quietly update their read on you just to protect themselves.
The narrative shifts.
Dramatically. The internal narrative shifts from, we found a passionate, perfect fit candidate, to, this candidate is disorganized, uncommunicative, and clearly playing games with us. The warmth just evaporates.
It's the exact same dynamic as dating. I mean, we've all seen this play out. You have an amazing, deep, connection-filled third date. You talk for hours, you laugh, you map out a weekend trip, and then one person entirely ignores a text message for 4 days because they read some terrible advice online that they need to seem busy and high value to maintain leverage.
Oh, yeah. The worst advice.
Right. The silent person thinks they are building mystique. But to the person on the other end, they don't look high value. They just look flaky, inconsiderate, or entirely uninterested. The natural human response to that is to emotionally detach and protect your own ego.
And the business equivalent of that emotional detachment is severe. Liu specifically highlights the structural consequence. This behavior is frequently the exact trigger that caused the company to actively slow walk your offer.
We all know companies have levers to delay processes if they get cold feet, but let's break down the mechanics of the slow walk in this specific context. The candidate thinks the offer is locked in stone. How does the company structurally undermine that?
So if you go dark, the The hiring committee realizes they might lose you to a competitor, or worse, they realize they might not actually want you anymore because your communication style is a massive red flag.
Right.
But they usually won't formally retract the verbal offer right away because that creates HR friction. Instead, they activate their contingency plans. They have candidate number 2, the close runner-up, waiting in the wings. So the company initiates the slow walk.
How does that look to the candidate?
Well, when you, the silent candidate, finally deign to reply on day 4, suddenly the tone has changed. You're told the HR approval process for the final paperwork is taking a bit longer than expected due to internal audits. Or the hiring manager is suddenly traveling and unavailable to sign off until next week.
Ah, they are artificially inflating the timeline to buy themselves breathing room.
Yes. They are buying time to quietly warm up candidate number 2 to see if the runner-up is a safer, more communicative, more reliable bet. By trying to play a power game with silence, the candidate has actively jeopardized their own standing. They haven't frozen the game. They've simply given the opposing team time to execute a completely different play.
And the irony is, the candidate is sitting there completely oblivious to the fact that their leverage is evaporating by the hour.
They have no idea.
Which leads to an even more disastrous compound error. Because when the silent candidate finally does emerge from the shadows and decides to speak up, it is almost always to initiate a negotiation. But because they have isolated themselves, because they have actively alienated the recruiter who was originally their ally, they end up marching into that negotiation completely blind.
This is where a lack of sophisticated business acumen severely trips up even highly intelligent candidates. Lose Insight's transition here from the behavioral mistake of silence to the actual structural mechanics of how candidates negotiate poorly.
This part was eye-opening.
Because candidates routinely attempt to negotiate without having the slightest understanding of what is actually movable within a company's specific compensation architecture.
The examples Lou provides in the source material are painfully relatable if you've ever been on the hiring side. He describes candidates who will aggressively fight tooth and nail for an extra $5,000 or $10,000 on their base salary, creating massive friction in the process when the company's equity refresh program was actually a highly flexible lever where the candidate could have easily secured tens of thousands of dollars in stock options with almost zero pushback.
Exactly.
Or a candidate will draw a line in the sand over an extra week of paid time off, not realizing that the manager is bound by a rigid company-wide PTO policy, but that same manager had absolute discretion to hand out a massive one-time signing bonus.
It is a classic misalignment of a candidate's priorities versus a company's available resources.
The analogy I always come back to for this is walking into a car dealership and stubbornly demanding free floor mats.
Oh, I love this one.
You're banging your fist on the salesperson's desk saying, "I refuse to sign this lease unless you throw in the all-weather floor mats." Meanwhile, the dealer is sitting there with a massive end-of-year factory incentive, practically begging to give you an upgraded engine or a premium tech package for free. But you won't stop arguing about the floor mats.
You're missing the big picture completely.
Right. You are exhausting your negotiating capital on entirely the wrong battle because you didn't bother to ask what incentives were actually on the table.
That analogy translates perfectly to corporate finance. To understand why candidates make this mistake, we have to look under the hood of corporate budgeting. This is the hidden architecture that dictates every job offer you will ever receive.
Let's get into the mechanics of that.
A hiring manager does not just have a single giant vault of money that they can pull from at will to secure a candidate. Compensation is strictly divided into different financial buckets, and a hiring manager has vastly different levels of authorization and flexibility for each specific bucket.
Let's make that concrete. We all know salary bands exist. But how rigid are these buckets in practice when a manager is desperate to hire someone?
They can be immovably rigid. Take base salary, for instance. Base salary is an ongoing compounding liability for a company, so it is strictly controlled by HR compensation bands to ensure internal equity.
Okay, so it's not just a suggestion.
Not at all. If the role you are applying for is categorized as a level 3 analyst, the approved salary range might be locked strictly between $80,000 and $95,000. It truly doesn't matter if the hiring manager thinks you walk on water. They physically cannot offer you $105,000 in base salary without triggering a massive internal audit.
Wow.
They would have to justify why you are being paid more than every other level 3 analyst in the department, which risks internal revolt, retention issues, and even legal liabilities regarding pay equity.
So pushing relentlessly against that specific bucket isn't just annoying, it's structurally impossible for the manager to accommodate without blowing up their own department.
Precisely. However, that exact same hiring manager might have a completely separate, highly discretionary budget specifically earmarked for one-time recruitment and retention incentives. They might be able to authorize a $15,000 signing bonus with nothing more than a quick email to their finance partner.
So they have the money, it's just in a different place.
Exactly. Or, as in Lucie's example, the company might have a rigid, universal PTO policy that literally requires the CEO's signature to alter for a single employee, making it a non-starter. But that manager might have immense unwritten flexibility to offer remote work days, flexible hours, or a generous professional development stipend that covers expensive conferences and certifications.
So when a candidate blindly demands concessions from a fixed, locked bucket, they aren't just failing to get what they want. They are actively demonstrating a profound lack of organizational awareness.
Yes.
They are forcing the hiring manager to repeatedly say no, which fundamentally creates an adversarial, combative dynamic right at the moment they should be building collaborative rapport.
It's a failure to read the room on a structural level. But the obvious question is, how is a candidate supposed to know this? You don't work there yet. You don't have access to their internal HR manuals or their departmental budget spreadsheets. How do you know which buckets are locked and which are flexible?
And this is where Stephen Liu's advice shifts from diagnosing the problem to providing a tactical masterclass. He suggests a specific maneuver, the 10-minute pre-offer conversation.
It is an incredibly sophisticated approach that bypasses the blind negotiation trap entirely. The strategy is to intercept the process before the formal, written offer is generated and finalized by HR.
Okay.
You request a brief, informal alignment call with the recruiter or the hiring manager. And during this call, you don't make demands. You ask a highly mature, exploratory question.
Which is?
You ask, as we move toward finalizing the details, could you walk me through the structure of compensation for this role and let me know where the team typically has the most flexibility?
The phrasing of that is so important. You are asking them to map the terrain for you. You are explicitly asking, where are your flexible levers? It is deeply disarming because it instantly removes all that adversarial tension.
It changes the entire psychological dynamic of the negotiation. You are no longer an opponent trying to blindly extract maximum value from their budget. You are inviting them to act as a collaborator. You are acknowledging that they have constraints, and you are asking them to help you navigate those constraints so you can reach a mutual win.
So what does this all mean? It means the reality is most recruiters genuinely want to close the deal.
Oh, definitely. They want this off their plate.
You give them an opening to be transparent, they will often take it. If a recruiter tells you, listen, the base salary is absolutely maxed out for this band, I cannot move it a single dollar. But I have a lot of wiggle room on a sign-on bonus, and we have a very aggressive equity grant we can lean into, while you instantly know exactly where to focus your energy.
Okay.
You stop banging on the desk for the floor mats, and you collaboratively figure out how to maximize the upgraded engine. You get infinitely further with a pre-offer strategy where you map the terrain than you ever will with a blind counteroffer thrown over the wall after the paperwork is already drafted.
Absolutely. But this concept of mapping the terrain doesn't just apply to financial compensation. It applies to the actual work you are being hired to do. And this represents a natural pivot point in the College Recruiter Guide, transitioning from financial negotiation to the investigative requirements of accepting a role.
Right.
Because you cannot have a truly collaborative negotiation, and you certainly shouldn't be signing a multi-year employment contract if you have a massive investigative blind spot regarding the day-to-day reality of the position.
Which brings us to what the sources highlight as the fatal flaw of being a passive passenger in the hiring process. We're moving from the mechanics of the deal into the physical and operational reality of the role itself.
The daily grind.
Yeah. We all know that making a good career decision requires deep knowledge of the position, but apparently candidates at all levels are failing spectacularly at gathering this intelligence during the final window.
The guide draws heavily here on insights from Farouk Musafar, the CMO and co-founder of Quantum Jobs USA, and George Firnoff, the co-founder and CEO of Telmatic. Both experts point to a massive investigative failure that occurs the moment the candidate feels they have secured the offer.
They just switch off.
Musafar notes that candidates tend to go completely passive. They assume the evaluated portion of the relationship is entirely over, and they fail to ask the critical, revealing questions that would actually tell them if they want the job in the first place.
Musafar outlines a few specific manifestations of this passive mindset, and they range from basic etiquette failures to massive strategic blunders. He touches on the disappearance of standard courtesies like failing to send a thank you email.
Yeah.
Now, I know some people might roll their eyes at this. We operate in a fast-paced digital world. Does a thank you note actually move the needle in 2026?
It doesn't necessarily win you the job on its own, but its absence is acutely felt as a negative signal. Muzafar's point is that the follow-up note is a baseline indicator of professional courtesy and detail orientation. It signals that you respect the time and resources the company invested in evaluating you.
Ah, I see.
When a candidate secures the verbal offer and suddenly stops utilizing basic professional etiquette, it signals to the employer that the candidate's politeness was purely transactional. It was a performance they dropped the second they got what they wanted.
It's the difference between someone who is genuinely collaborative and someone who is just playing a role to get a paycheck. But the far more damaging manifestation of this passive mindset is the failure to interrogate the future.
Yes.
Musafar notes that candidates almost never ask probing questions to clarify the granular details of the role, the specific team dynamics, or the concrete metrics for how they will scale up and be evaluated in the company.
Which is truly baffling when you consider the stakes. Think about the structure of a standard interview process. It is almost entirely backward-looking. The hiring manager is focused on your past, your resume, your previous projects, how you handled conflicts at your last job.
It's basically a historical review.
Exactly. The post-interview pre-acceptance window is the only time where the candidate has the leverage to rigorously interrogate the future.
You have to flip the script. You need to know exactly who you are reporting to. What does success look like in the first 90 days? Is the internal culture highly collaborative, or is it deeply siloed and aggressively competitive? If you don't ask these questions, you aren't accepting a job. You are just accepting a job title and hoping for the best.
And this passive acceptance extends to the financial side as well, in a way that directly impacts how the employer views your competence. Well, Musafar highlights a fascinating psychological dynamic regarding salary negotiation. We established earlier how dangerous blind or arrogant negotiation can be. But Musafar points out the equally dangerous extreme: candidates who simply accept the initial starting salary without making any attempt to bargain whatsoever.
This is a crucial nuance. We all know we are supposed to negotiate. But what I found so compelling about Muzafar's insight is why companies actually want you to do it. He notes that almost all companies actively expect a candidate to negotiate, and they view the failure to do so as a mild red flag. Why on earth would a company be disappointed they got to hire you for cheaper than they budgeted?
Because hiring is about securing talent that will drive the business forward, and negotiation is a proxy for professional competence.
Okay, that makes sense.
Musafar uses the phrase appreciated and valued self-worth. Look at it from the hiring manager's perspective. They're hiring you for a role that will likely require you to navigate complex internal politics or negotiate with external vendors, advocate for project budgets, or defend your strategic ideas in a boardroom full of executives.
Right, there's always conflict.
If they slide a piece of paper across the table with an initial lowball salary number, and you just meekly sign it without even a polite collaborative inquiry into flexibility, what does that signal?
It signals a lack of backbone. If a candidate won't even advocate for their own livelihood and their own market value, how can the hiring manager trust that this person will fiercely advocate for the company's bottom line when the pressure is on?
Exactly. The act of negotiating respectfully utilizing that collaborative terrain mapping framework we discussed isn't just about maximizing your paycheck. It is a live-fire demonstration of a critical business skill.
You are passing a hidden competency test.
Yes, you are actively proving to the employer that you possess the professional confidence, tact, and strategic thinking they are paying to bring in-house.
That completely reframes the anxiety around negotiating. It's not a combative hurdle. It's your final opportunity to showcase your professional value. But beyond the money and the metrics, Musafar points to a physical or at least environmental investigative failure that I find genuinely shocking.
Oh, this one is huge.
He notes that a staggering number of candidates accept offers without ever asking to see the specific environment where they will be working, or asking to speak with the peers they will be working alongside.
It is arguably the most consequential blind spot a candidate can have.
It's astonishing. You are agreeing to commit 40, 50, maybe 60 hours a week to an organization. You are handing over a massive percentage of your waking adult life. And professionals are doing this without ever seeing the room they'll be sitting in, without having a 5-minute conversation with the person at the next desk. It defies logic.
It really does.
Wait, think about it like this. If you were buying a house, you wouldn't just look at a photo of the front door on Zillow and say, looks good, I'll sign the 30-year mortgage.
Never.
You would demand to walk through the rooms. You'd check if the foundation is rotting. You'd want to know if the neighbors blast heavy metal music at 3 a.m. Why do we treat our careers with less scrutiny than real estate?
The house analogy is highly applicable here. Candidates get so caught up in the validation of being chosen that they forget they also have to live in the house they just bought. And in today's complex working environment, whether that's a physical office, a fully remote setup, or a hybrid model, you absolutely must look under the hood.
If it's a physical office, you need to feel the energy of the floor. Is it a chaotic, deafening, open plan layout where you won't be able to hear yourself think? Or is it a tomb where people are silently staring at monitors with zero interaction? Do the employees actually look engaged, or do they look miserable?
And the scrutiny is just as important, if not more so, for remote roles.
Really? How do you tour a remote office?
Well, a remote work environment isn't defined by the physical desk. It's defined by the communication culture. You need to ask for a brief 15-minute informal video chat with a future peer, someone who isn't the hiring manager.
Oh, to get the real scoop.
Yes. You need to ask them how work actually flows. Is the culture asynchronous and respectful of boundaries? Or is there an unspoken expectation that you will reply to Slack messages at 10 p.m. on a Sunday? You have to investigate the operational reality before you sign the contract.
And this concept of active investigation leads perfectly into the insights of George Fironoff, the CEO of Telmatic, who takes this proactive mindset to an entirely different level. Fironoff suggests a strategy for the post-interview phase that completely redefines the relationship between candidate and employer. He argues that candidates fail because they view the interview process as a discrete pass-fail event.
Yes. The standard mindset is to treat the interview like a college exam. You sit down, you take the test, you hand in your paper, and you passively wait for the professor to give you a grade.
It's very passive.
Fironoff argues that the most elite, highly successful candidates reject this model entirely. They understand that the hiring process is a continuous feedback loop. They don't just wait for a verdict. They actively attempt to influence the outcome even after the formal questioning is over.
Fironoff's specific tactic for this is brilliant. He suggests that candidates should send a succinct post-interview statement that goes far beyond a polite thank you note. This statement should actively address and attempt to neutralize any gaps, weaknesses, or concerns that were exposed during the interview itself.
It requires a high degree of self-awareness. You have to be able to honestly assess your own performance and recognize where you fell short of the ideal candidate profile.
Let's role-play this to see how powerful it can be. Let's say I'm interviewing for a senior marketing analytics role. The interview is going great, but halfway through, the hiring manager starts drilling down into deeply technical questions about a specific data visualization platform, let's say Tableau.
Yeah, very common scenario.
Right, and I have to be honest in the room. I have to admit I have fundamental knowledge of data structures, but I am not an advanced user in Tableau. That is a clear gap. It's a weakness that could cost me the offer.
In that scenario, the standard candidate leaves the interview, kicks themselves all weekend for not brushing up on Tableau, and just crosses their fingers, hoping their other skills outweigh that specific deficit. They remain passive.
But the candidate utilizing Fironoff's continuous feedback loop does something entirely different. They leave that interview on Friday, and they immediately spend the entire weekend doing a crash course certification in Tableau.
Wow, just tackling it head on.
Yes, and then in their strategic follow-up communication on Monday morning, they write something like, I really appreciated our deep dive into the analytics workflow on Friday. Recognizing how central Tableau is to the team's daily reporting, I spent this weekend completing an advanced data modeling course on the platform, and I'm incredibly energized by how this deeper technical understanding will allow me to execute the specific Q3 strategies we discussed.
The impact of that communication on a hiring manager cannot be overstated. It is a masterclass in professional maneuvering.
What specifically does that signal to the employer? Because it's not just about learning a software tool.
It signals multiple, highly desirable behavioral traits simultaneously. First, it demonstrates extreme proactivity. Second, it shows that you are highly coachable and self-directed. But most importantly, it proves to the employer how you will handle adversity on the job.
No, that's the real test.
Yes, every employee encounters deficits in their own knowledge eventually. When you hit a wall, do you throw your hands up and say, I don't know how to do this, and wait for management to fix it? Or do you independently seek out the resources to close your own knowledge gap?
So it's about problem-solving methodology.
By patching the weakness exposed in the interview, you are actively demonstrating your problem-solving methodology in real time. You are proving your operational worth before you are even on the payroll.
Treating the interview as a two-way street where you are aggressively investigating their environment while simultaneously patching your own weaknesses isn't just a clever tactic to secure an offer. It is the ultimate demonstration of a candidate's maturity. Which brings us to the philosophical core of this entire deep dive.
The underlying issue.
All of the disparate missteps we've explored, dropping the professional facade, going dark on communications, negotiating blindly, failing to investigate the reality of the role, they all stem from the exact same root cause.
Yes. They are all symptoms of a fundamental lack of professional maturity. And this is where the final section of our analysis focuses, drawing on the perspective of Milos Eric, the co-founder of Oysterlink, alongside Fironoff's concluding thoughts. They address the underlying mindset that governs how candidates approach the final stage of the hiring life cycle.
Eric points out a very common trap, especially for professionals eager to escape a current toxic job or recent grads desperate for their first paycheck. He notes that candidates frequently rush to finalize the deal prematurely. They view the job offer through a purely transactional lens,
Which is very limiting.
The mindset is simply, you agree to pay me X dollars, and in exchange, I agree to sit at a desk for Y hours a week. Let's sign the paper so I can stop interviewing.
It is a deeply short-term, commoditized way of thinking about a career. Eric emphasizes that a mature professional approaches the acceptance of an offer not as a simple financial transaction, but as a mutual intention to develop.
I really like that phrase.
It is a strategic commitment to reciprocal growth. The company is investing in your potential, and you are investing your time and talent in their objectives.
An intention to develop. That framing fundamentally changes the posture of how you interact with leadership during the offer stage.
It absolutely does, and Eric highlights a reality that most candidates completely miss. Employers use this specific pre-acceptance window as a diagnostic tool to evaluate how you process complex thoughts.
Really? Even at the very end?
Oh, especially at the end. When you are presented with a multifaceted, high-stakes decision like a career change, how do you handle the cognitive load? Do you panic and rush to the finish line? Do you become defensive and arrogant? Or do you methodically analyze the variables? High-performing, mature candidates use this window to clearly define expectations, to align on professional development trajectories, and to establish concrete benchmarks for mutual success before they ever sign the contract.
Eric offers a very specific directive in the text that serves as a perfect anchor for this mindset. He explicitly advises, do not rush to finalize the deal.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it's essential.
You have to demonstrate to yourself and critically to the employer that you comprehend the scope and impact of the position far beyond its baseline monetary value. He notes that this deliberate, thoughtful pacing is ultimately what elevates a candidate from being just a qualified applicant to being the clear choice among many others.
By slowing the process down just enough to ask strategic questions, you signal to the executive team that you take your own career trajectory and their company's operational health incredibly seriously. You project the confidence of someone making a calculated strategic alliance, rather than projecting the desperation of someone who just needs a paycheck to clear rent.
And the execution of that mature mindset doesn't end the moment the ink dries on the contract. George Fironoff returns with a crucial observation about the final hidden trap in the hiring life cycle, the pre-start lull.
Yes. The waiting period.
This is the period usually 2 to 3 weeks after you have formally accepted the offer, but before your actual first day of work.
The pre-start lull is where even great candidates often drop the ball. The natural human tendency is to sign the offer, breathe a massive sigh of relief, hand in your 2 weeks' notice at your old job, and mentally check out.
Right, time to coast.
Candidates assume a completely passive position, treating the buffer period almost like a vacation. They just sit on their hands, waiting for day one to arrive.
It's the corporate equivalent of a student showing up on the first day of the semester, sitting at an empty desk and waiting for the professor to hand them a syllabus to tell them what they're supposed to care about.
Precisely. Firnov stresses that elite candidates utilize this pre-start lull as a runway for acceleration. They don't just wait, they prepare. They use the time to familiarize themselves with the internal architecture of the company before they're officially on the clock.
Let's talk about what that proactive preparation actually looks like in practice, because you don't want to overstep and start demanding access to confidential servers before you are an employee. How does a mature professional navigate this?
A mature professional reaches out to their new manager a week before their start date with a highly targeted request. They say, I am incredibly energized to dive into the work next Monday. To ensure I can hit the ground running and add value immediately, are there any non-confidential internal documents, recent quarterly reviews, or strategic overviews of the tech stack that I can review this week?
That is such a powerful move. It shows immense initiative.
It does. Furthermore, they might take an hour to research their new departmental colleagues on LinkedIn. They send a brief, polite connection request saying, Hi, I'm joining the team next week as the new marketing director. Really looking forward to working with you and learning from your experience on the product side.
You are actively building internal rapport and mapping the social terrain before you even have a company email address. And think about the psychological impact that has on the hiring manager who advocated for you. It instantly cures any lingering buyer's remorse before it can even take root. They see you taking proactive ownership of your onboarding, and they think, yes, I absolutely made the right call hiring this person.
You are actively validating their decision, proving your competence before day one even begins.
We have dissected a massive amount of corporate psychology here. Let's synthesize the overarching narrative from this college recruiter guide. The fundamental paradigm shift every professional needs to make is recognizing that the timeline between the final interview question and the accepted job offer is not a relaxed victory lap. It is arguably the most highly active, highly scrutinized, and delicate phase of the entire hiring life cycle.
You must navigate it with extreme intentionality. You cannot allow your communication to go dark. You must remain responsive and professional. You have to actively investigate the operational reality of the role, including the physical or digital environment, and the team dynamics.
And the negotiation piece.
Right. You have to approach negotiation not as a blind demand for fixed resources, but as a collaborative effort to locate flexible compensation levers. You must proactively patch the weaknesses you exposed during the interview. And above all, you must demonstrate a mature, strategic intention to develop, rather than a desperate transactional rush to the finish line.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final layer to this entire dynamic that we need to address. We've spent this entire time unpacking how employers utilize this highly specific window to scrutinize you. We've explored how they are testing your maturity, your communication, and your strategic thinking. But building directly on Farouk Muzaffar's core philosophy that the best candidates treat this process as a genuinely two-way decision, there is a flip side to this coin.
It is the ultimate strategic takeaway for the candidate. The glass in this observation room goes both ways. Think critically about the interactions we've described. When you execute these mature strategies, when you ask thoughtful questions about success metrics, when you politely ask to map the terrain of their compensation flexibility, when you request a brief chat with a future peer to understand the communication culture, how does the company react?
That is the ultimate litmus test.
It is your most accurate preview of their true corporate culture. If you behave like a mature, collaborative professional seeking alignment, and the hiring manager gets instantly defensive, or the recruiter becomes opaque and evasive, or they act annoyed that you dare to ask about the reality of the work environment before signing your life away,
then you haven't just exposed a flaw in the hiring process. You have just looked under the hood of a toxic organization. If they bristle at professional maturity during the courtship phase, when they are supposedly on their best behavior, imagine how they will treat you when you are actively relying on them for your livelihood.
Exactly.
If they fail that test, you might have just successfully dodged a massive career bullet. So the next time you navigate this precarious post-interview phase and you find an offer sitting in your inbox, certainly ensure that you are passing their behavioral tests with flying colors, but never forget to step back and ask yourself, are they passing yours?
Are they passing your test? I absolutely love that framing. It reclaims the agency in the hiring process and puts the professional right back in the driver's seat where they belong.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly detailed deep dive. We hope you carry this empowered, investigative, and highly strategic mindset into your next major career transition. Because remember, securing the verbal offer is just spiking the football on the 5-yard line. The game isn't over until you have rigorously surveyed the field, collaboratively negotiated the terms, and confidently walked it into the end zone on your own terms. We will catch you next time.
This has been From Dorms to Desks, job hunting tips for those early in their careers. A podcast brought to you by college recruiter job search site, which believes that every student and recent grad deserves a great career. Each episode, we dive into tips, tricks, and insights that will help you land your next part-time, seasonal, internship, or entry-level job. Subscribe to this podcast for free now, so you don't miss an episode, and visit www.collegerecruiter.com to find your next great job.